Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Well, good afternoon on this beautiful Monday. We are so happy to have you listening. My name is Chelsey Youman, and I am here today with David Fraga from Gateway Ministries, and we have just a stellar millennial roundtable lined up for you guys today. Lots and lots to talk about and process together as conservatives from Christian millennial perspectives, hopefully diverse perspectives, lots of issues for you on our show today. First, I'll let you, David, introduce yourself to our audience who haven't heard you in a while. I'm so glad you're with us.
It's been so long, but I'm so grateful to be here. Very excited to have this Millennial Roundtable with you, Chelsey. But yes, my name is David Fraga. I'm living here in Dallas, Texas. Very excited for what God is doing in my life. Primarily what I do is I'm a groups coordinator right now for Gateway Ministry. I help do men's ministry primarily. And I also have a nonprofit called Kingdom Initiative, where we initiate kingdom work, and we focus on doing content and media for just for people. We want them to experience God through media. And then we do another ministry called Overcoming Ministries, where we help just evangelize and we preach the gospel in the EDM scene. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, you are just on the front lines, and I so appreciate that and your perspective you'll bring to this. I always say we need someone to bring the scripture and the Jesus truth, because I have a legal background. I can talk about politics all day long, but I love, having a second voice there to just be able to bring truth and love. So thank you so much. We also have Walker Wildmon on the phone. Are you there, Walker? Oh, it doesn't look like he's here yet. So we'll go ahead and dive right in on our first article, which, of course, all of our listeners can pull up on pointofview.net. It's an article I wrote, actually, as a counterpiece, so I'll introduce it. But it's entitled, "Preborn Lives Are on the Line in the Election for 2020, and We Have a Duty as Christians to Vote Accordingly." And I know this is a common theme in every single election. Christians all over the country really want to vote in line with their views on life, that God created life and human dignity with a purpose, and that the sanctity of life is really important. But I've seen lately, and David, I don't know if you've seen this too, just these recent arguments coming out of Christian conservative circles to really justify not voting on the life issue, or voting even Democrat, and saying, life issue isn't really on the line in the presidential election. There's not much that office can do to help promote and protect life. And I think that that's actually really inaccurate. There's a lot of things that the executive branch does to put funding in the right places towards supporting pregnant women, towards helping them keep their lives, not to mention the judges and the appointments that the president can make. And I think this presidency in the last 4 years is a great example of that. Hundreds and hundreds of life appointments in the federal courts who are going to uphold pro-life legislation. And so even though local states will pass your pro-life legislation, they are challenged. Those legislation pieces are challenged as quickly as they're passed, and those challenges go straight to federal court. And so your federal judges, they matter so much. I work with Human Coalition Action. I work on advocating for our female clients who are pregnant and want a different choice. They want to choose life, but they need help with their circumstances, and bills like the bills I have set ready to go in the Texas legislature for next session, they're not going to see the light of day if we don't have constitutional judges that are originalist, allow those bills to stand. And so there's an immense amount of ways that this article discusses that the presidency can impact life.
Right.
And if you find yourself, if you're a listener, grappling with that issue and saying, look, I really, if you personally have a problem with President Trump or some of the things he says, and it's a difficult vote for you to defend, look up this article, pointofview.net, read it. It's on Town Hall, and just start looking through the ways that you really can. This vote really does matter on the life scale from a moral complicity standpoint. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely. And great insight, I believe. One of the biggest things that I love to bring in is the perspective of those around me. And so in this perspective, in this realm, they can be very easily parallel to the aspect of, does my vote matter? Does my vote matter in where I'm going to vote, coming up November? And is this vote going to actually make an impact?
That's right.
For the presidency to make actually an impact for other life issues, pro-life issues and whatnot. But the whole mindset, I know, for this generation and for people around me is like, is that a hill to die on, per se? Like, these are the questions they're asking themselves because they're struggling with, like, okay, this candidate perhaps could bring economic gain or whatnot, but is that exactly moral and ethical, right? And so they're asking themselves all these questions and wrestling and grappling, like you were just saying. But at the same time, what is exactly, what is the Lord speaking to them? Like, what are they listening? Who are they surrounding themselves with? And what are they actually battling for? And so I believe asking those questions like you were just proposing and, just talking about, and we were just sharing, I believe those are such healthy aspects mentally and bringing in a fresh perspective in terms of, okay, I need to understand that my vote does matter coming up in November. I need to understand that I need to catch up to see what is happening in this realm. Will these bills actually make an impact? And those are questions that are not a pessimistic mindset. It's just a question to really just put things in perspective, right?
That's absolutely right. And I think I deal a lot in my line of work just with Christians who are what you're saying. They're wrestling. Where does this issue take priority and why? And I would just say it is one of the few issues that lives are literally at stake for sure. On your ballot. And there's a moral obligation there when there are moral ramifications that are so extreme. We're talking hundreds of thousands of lives lost every single year. 53,000 lost in the state of Texas last year. 53,000. When you start looking at like the real ramifications of that, quote unquote policy issue, they are greater ramifications. And so I think for me, that like really weighs it in favor of being a top issue. But before we go to a break in just a minute, I do want to go ahead and introduce Walker Wildmon. Are you there on the line, Walker?
Yes, Chelsey, I'm here.
Great to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining our Millennial Roundtable. Walker, will you go ahead and tell our audience just who you are, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. My name is Walker Wildmon. I am Vice President of Operations and Public Policy Analyst for American Family Association, and our sister ministry, or the ministry underneath AFA that many people know about, is American Family Radio, which Point of View actually airs on American Family Radio. So I listen to you guys pretty often, and it's good to be on the show.
Well, thank you for joining us. I know you are in the heart of grappling with these issues we're talking about as well. Is there anything you want to add based on what Dave and I have just talked about, these pro-life issues at the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an issue amongst many other issues that Christians have to face. And I think it is the civil rights issue of our day. And that is, are we going to enact policies, and are we going to have judges that affirm that human life begins at conception, or are we going to go the opposite route, which we've been doing the last 40-plus years, and continue to allow babies to lose their life in the mother's womb? So it's a civil rights issue of our day, and I think, we actually, after 40-plus years of fighting this battle, we very well could in our lifetime see Roe versus Wade overturned.
Well, Walker, I hope you're right. We have to go to one of those mandatory breaks, but when we get back, we'll hear more from Walker Wildmon. Just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
As we get closer to Election Day, some people are asking the what-if question. What if the ballots in some states aren't confirmed by the time the Electoral College meets in December? What if neither presidential candidate wins the Electoral College vote? These are important questions that I hope we don't have to answer in real life, but here is how those questions should be decided according to the Constitution. The procedure is set forth by Article 2 of the Constitution and modified by the addition of the 12th Amendment. The House of Representatives meets to vote for the president, and you might assume that would be good news for Joe Biden since there are more Democrats in that chamber, but this would be the newly elected House members, which may or may not be majority Democrat. If you look at the Constitution, you will see that doesn't matter anyway. Each state delegation gets one vote. California gets one vote, even though they have 52 representatives in Congress, while Wyoming gets one vote. Currently, there are more states with Republicans than Democrats. Assuming those state delegations vote along party lines, that would be good news for Donald Trump. What about the vote for vice president? In this case, the Senate would vote for the vice president. Although it is unlikely, it is possible that the president who is selected and the vice president who is selected could be from different parties. That has happened before in American politics, but not since the 19th century. What if the House of Representatives fails to select the president by Inauguration Day? Well, the 20th Amendment specifies that the vice president-elect becomes the acting president until the House selects a president. But if neither chamber selects a president or vice president, then the Speaker of the House becomes president on Inauguration Day. If you're troubled by all of this, I suggest you start praying that none of this happens and that you make sure you vote this year. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable, where we're talking about all of our current events we can get our hands on in the next 3 hours from a millennial perspective. I have on the line Walker Wildmon, who is just giving us some great insight into our first topic today, which is why voting pro-life matters this fall, why your vote will actually make a difference in the lives of children who are not yet born everywhere. He is with the American Family Association. I'm so happy to have him with us. Walker, go ahead and continue. Let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that there's this conception out there that, or this idea out there that that Roe versus Wade, overturning it is the end all be all, if you will, for the pro-life movement or for the life movement, and it's really. That'll really not be the end of it by any means, because even an overturning of that court case at the Supreme Court would simply put this decision about when life begins and who can end the life, or whether the life should be able to live, puts it back into the states. Mm-hmm. So, which is why we really have to, and that's really where issues like this should be, is at the state level, but murder is murder, and it shouldn't be allowed even at the state level. But that issue, I mean, even getting Roe versus Wade overturned would be a huge victory, but it would still go back to the states. So that battle is likely going to live on for years to come.
That's right. You're so right. I'm glad you brought that to the surface, because I don't think the audience or everybody is always aware that even if Roe versus Wade was overturned tomorrow, just what you're saying, Walker, at that point, then there would be a reduction in abortion rates by only 25%, which, by the way, is still tens of thousands of lives. And that percentage, I don't want the numbers to get lost, that those are human beings. So any decrease in that number is really important. But then at that point, it just clears the way for states to make individual decisions for their state on how they're going to serve women and protect preborn children. And David and I were talking on the break, just explaining that states will pass regulations and laws regardless, relating to abortion and serving women, and then those laws immediately get challenged in federal courts. And so President Trump's appointments are the single biggest linchpin in this entire operation for saving lives, because he's appointed over 250 judges, which is incredible in 4 years. I mean, he's appointed so many, and those are at the lower court levels. We're not just talking his Supreme Court appointments, which we will talk about later on the show. But those are the judges that are upholding laws that say we need to protect children. We need to protect children when they feel pain. We need to protect mothers and make sure they get sonograms and have, the ability to go to doctors and receive the right type of medical care. Walker, what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I think, you're spot on in the importance here of the judicial branch. And, really our founders, when they set up our country, when they wrote our founding documents, they really didn't expect the judicial branch to be so important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's one of the three branches, so it's obviously important. Our founders set it up for a reason. But as far as it having so much sway over so many policy decisions, and being able to do these nationwide injunctions where one federal judge in one state, in one district, can make a ruling that affects people thousands of miles away, not how our founders envisioned. But nonetheless, that's where we are in our country. And you've seen throughout the last decade or so, and really even before that, where judges were completely reshaping policy in various states because, for example, 31 states, I believe it was, including California, all passed a marriage amendment, a constitutional marriage amendment, which stated the obvious, which Christians believe, and that is that marriage is between one man and one woman for life. And the Supreme Court, 9 judges at the Supreme Court, 5 to be more specific, overturned all of that work that Christians and others did over the past 20 years to get those marriage amendments put together and passed. All that was overturned by a couple of judges. So that shows all of this is important, whether it be the legislature, voting, and what kind of judges the executive branch puts forth.
You're so right. Justice Scalia famously said in an opinion, he was referring to the March for Life in Washington, D.C., where tens of thousands of pro-life citizens come together and they essentially march down to the Supreme Court from the mall in D.C. It's an incredible showing for just how strong Americans are on this issue and how passionate they are about this issue. But Justice Scalia referred to that and said the fact that we have protesters outside discussing on our court steps issues means that we have delved into political space that we do not belong. And I thought that was such a powerful statement for, you're right, it's the reality of where we are, but it's not really the right position constitutionally for the courts to be in. It that should be down to the policy and the legislatures. One thing David and I were talking about a little bit earlier is wanting to make sure that all of our listeners, that we feel some hope today, because I think that there's so much negativity that we're seeing constantly. You can't turn on your TV without seeing it. It feels like the world is so divided. You can't get into Facebook without seeing arguments. And while that's the reality, election years are difficult. They are difficult on our country. They bring out our differences. We have a lot to hope in. And so one of the reasons I put this article on pointofview.net is to show that we have a lot of ground to gain by our vote in November. There's a lot to look forward to. We can continue to pull funding from Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. We can continue to fund clinics that are serving women, making sure they're healthy, but protecting their children at the same time. I mean, there's a whole host of ways that our vote in November, it's not something we're reticent to do, but we should be excited to do. David, when you're dealing with millennials out there in the world and in your ministry every day, and people are so fatigued by what they're hearing and seeing, I mean, do you have any encouragement for them and our listeners when you talk about these issues?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things right now in this season is that we are so overwhelmed by content, like you were just saying earlier. And because of that, it's almost as if we can just go mentally into a fetal position, like into a position of like, okay, this is too much. I just want to get away from this. But how do I get away from this? Like, and there's almost no way out that you have to see it. It's like we're forced to see all these issues taking place in our country, in our nation, within our households. And a lot of people feel so isolated is just the term that I always hear. And I can tell you this one thing. In this season, I know that it isn't actually an invitation of solitude to be more intentional, to prioritize things that actually matter, right? And I think the biggest piece of hope is to understand that what Christ is doing in our nation is bringing the opportunity to have awareness on issues like this of pro-life that people just kind of like forget about, people or even just about the election. We're not so intentional because we're so busy a lot of times, and so we forget to vote, forget to register, forget to actually do our part, quote unquote, in living out, the Christian life, which is to love God and love people. That's what it is.
That's right. We all want that same goal. We are about to get down to the bottom of the hour, but Walker, are there any last things you want to make sure that we hear from you on? Go ahead and introduce who you are again and let us know where we can follow you and all of the good work you're doing.
Yeah, one last point before we wrap up this segment. David had a great point there, and this is the gospel compels Christians to live out their faith in obedience to God, no matter what facet of life we're talking about. Whether it talks about voting once a year, twice a year, where you work and how you behave, how you raise a family, all these things we have to just be obedient to God and follow His word, and then from that we'll be salt and light and be able to shape culture in a positive light. So this is elections are important, judges are important. And we need Christians to not be afraid to stand for their faith and share the gospel in all aspects of life. And you can visit our website, American Family Association's website, afa.net. My name is Walker Wildmon, and it's been great to be on the show.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Walker. Definitely speaking truth in love there to Christians everywhere. When we look back in history, I read this article this week that said when you look back in history and the church wasn't involved because they thought they shouldn't be because it's politics, you ask, where was the church? Where was the church on slavery? Where was the church on civil rights injustices? From the beginning of time on.
Right.
And so we don't want this to be an era where we look back and say the same thing. The church has a duty. We know we care about our brothers and sisters in Christ. We care about the poor and the unfortunate and the widow and the orphan. I mean, we care about so many issues as Christians because the Bible commands us on those issues. And so voting in line with that is so important and just one step in addition to living out your life in a way that knows your neighbors and loves your neighbors well. So I'm really grateful, David and Walker, for both of your perspective today at the Millennial Roundtable. You can go to Facebook, Point of View Radio on Facebook and watch us live. You can also go to our website, pointofview.net, and look up any of the articles we're talking about today. We've got some great things ahead for us. We're going to be talking about Netflix and some big trouble they're actually in right now. And a little bit later, of course, we'll be talking about the late Justice Ginsburg and what her Supreme Court vacancy means for everyone.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, welcome back. I am Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable. Just who you wanted to hear from on a Monday morning. We're motivated. We're excited.
Let's go.
I'm here with David Fraga from Gateway Ministries. He works with their group's ministry there. Mm-hmm. So welcome, David. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. It's such a joy to be here, and I'm so grateful to just be able to have some great discussion on some in-depth and heavy topics at times, right? But we're here to encourage. Right. We're here to discuss things, and we're here to honestly bring a fresh perspective.
We are hopeful that it's a fresh perspective and not just like a resounding gong to everyone. But
Absolutely.
We are going to do our best. We have been talking a little bit about an article I drafted. It was really meant to be a counterpiece. It's on our website, pointofview.net, about how your pro-life vote this November actually, it really does matter. And some of the specific political ways that will make a difference. It will save lives. There are some arguments circulating right now that it won't. Don't worry about voting on the pro-life issue for the presidency. And I just want to say, very in a straightforward way, that is adamantly false. So there are a lot of ways we have ground to gain to save lives, especially at the state levels. But who decides state legislation, whether it lives or dies? Your federal courts. And so those appointments matter. That's where we've been. And now David and I are going to turn a little bit. We started this a little bit in the last segment, just talking about where, as Christians and the church in general, we might be a little bit, it's discouraging. You turn on the news, you turn on Facebook, everywhere you go. It just, the world is so divided. It always makes me a little bit sad during election years. I love politics. I love campaigning. I love talking about the issues. But these things have become so hotly contested. It's dividing our country, and it's really hard on our country right now. I mean, we are literally seeing violent protests across the country. And I had, as an example, a friend on Facebook who moved to England, like in desperation and fear for our country, say, I am worried by what I'm seeing. Is all of this true? And I just wanted to like tell her, you guys, we're all pretty well adjusted, even in light of COVID. Like most of us are still going to our jobs. You know, we still are in our homes. Our lives are functioning well. We're Christians. Like, our hope is not in this world. It's not in politics. We have a lot to look forward to. But what we often see is what, David, you were talking about before we took a break, that people just get a little bit paralyzed in the church when they look around and see the hot mess express that we see every day in the political realm. And I wanted to give you the floor a little bit because you had such great thoughts on the break.
Absolutely. And I really do appreciate that. And, you know, as we were talking, we even talked a little bit off break about just even the concept that was brought early into this country, which is the separation of church and state, you know, and just like how we think that setting healthy, quote unquote, boundaries and like saying, hey, we got to compartmentalize like certain things, whether it's our religion, whether it's our work, whether it's our home life, whatnot. But overall, like the idea and the thought process that I'd like to bring in this perspective is that if you really think about where our country's at in such a season like this, it's been a wild 2020, right? And this does not surprise God. This does not surprise God. And so I think for us, you know, one of the best quotes that I heard a pastor say is that if it doesn't begin with God, it will always end in disappointment. And so because of that, we have set expectations for 2020 even before 2020 was even here. And the expectations were like, one, it's an election year. Two, we have so many hopes and dreams to accomplish. We have so many desires that we believe could make a positive impact in our own minds, in our lives, whatever it could be. But overall, this nation has always struggled with a spirit of division in terms of politics and in terms of religion. If you think about those two topics, they are very divisive. We have so many denominations, and in terms of religion, we have so many different parties in terms of politics. And what it does is it separates the people, when in reality, God has called us to come together in unity, and only through unity we are perfected in the image of Christ, right? We're the bride. And so all that being said, that's not to bash anyone or anything. That's to be encouraged that only when we fix our eyes on Christ, on these topics, on these issues, can we really understand that, okay, how can I love my neighbor? How can I actually do that? Not just that, but how can I actually walk into the church and not be so fearful in actually like voting or in actually engaging
in these issues,
in these conversations, because it's so easy to react instead of to respond in love, which is what we're called to. A reaction is kind of like a reflex most of the times. And a lot of times our emotional reaction, and we're very emotional during this time because we've been so alone and we don't even know how to respond sometimes, is that we react in anger, we react in like jealousy, we react in so many ways that our flesh wants to lead us when really we're supposed to be led by the Spirit. And it's so hard. I'm not saying I have this figured out or that there's a formula to figure it out, but we must be dependent on grace.
Yes. You know, I had the question for you on the break because you are in ministry, David, and I'm very much in the political legal realm, the policy
Right.
side things. I draft pro-life legislation. And for me, it's just so clear. Like, if I believe that, life is precious and God created
Absolutely.
every life with a purpose and a goal, with the days measured out, every hair on that baby's head God knows about, in my head, I know these things in my heart. So I am activated to advocate for those things. But sometimes I'll come across like, not so much church members like our audience, but like the actual church itself and church leadership, where they're not engaging on this issue and they're not the same level of willingness, I should say, to advocate. And that's not the case for all churches. There are so many great churches that are related to pregnancy resource centers and support issues, are very outspoken from the pulpit, like my church at Watermark and Gateway, but I had the question for you. It's, why is there that hesitancy to engage? And I think you just answered it in such a great way to say people don't want to be divided.
Yeah.
People don't like, the dissension, and that there is a love in that, and in Christianity that says we desire unity, we desire peace, we desire kindness. And it just reminds me that both sides, now if you translate that into the political realm, both sides, they ultimately want the same thing. We all want what's best for our neighbor and our country. And how we go about that is very, very different at times and looks really different. But, if ultimately I see something like on Facebook, somebody posted something about, if you vote for Trump, you just don't care about racism. And that was so offensive to me, because I thought, like, well, the right, Republicans have really good policy ideas for how to resolve racial injustice. Like, I've got a list, my arm long, of ways that Republican policies really would help eradicate a lot of the institutionalized problems we're seeing. And so me remembering in that moment when I'm tempted to feel divided, that we all do want the same thing, but as Christians, we are called to engage, and we are called to love our neighbor and speak truth in love.
Yeah, no, it's so good, and I'm encouraged by you just sharing that in itself. And it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing to lay down our motives, our agenda, our will, in order for someone else to live, to enter the kingdom, perhaps. Because if it doesn't come from a place of love, is it of Christ? And that's just the question that we have to ask ourselves. That's why Psalm 139 is one of my favorite Psalms. And it's like, search me, O God, know my anxious thoughts, right? Like, search my heart, honestly, because from the abundance of the heart we speak, from the abundance of the heart we do. Our identity is not in what we do, but who he says we are, right? And so it's very easy that we get so, infatuated with the fruit of something, of what we would like an outcome to be, instead of God is inviting us to focus on the root issues of what is really leading us in our hearts. But it's so tough. It's so difficult. It's easy to already have a formula, have a solution to these topics, or to loving our neighbor, quote unquote. All you had to do is serve them. That's it. But it's not that at all. It's so much more. It's dying to self, literally, almost.
I think that's a great point. David, when we get back, I think one thing we can do is really make it clear, what are some action steps, tangibly we can take as Christians? What does it look like to engage and to not, sit back and just discuss it in our homes, but get out there and say, look, I care about women and men and children in my community. I care about the poor in my community. How do I serve and love them well? What does that look like? So when we get back after this quick break, we'll do some of that, talking through just we as believers, what can we do to continue to engage and build oneness and unity in the middle of election season, which is not really, close to unity or oneness at this phase from what we're seeing. But there is hope on the horizon. Don't forget, you can watch live at our Facebook page, Point of View Radio. You can also look up the articles we've discussed today at pointofview.net anytime you want. David Fraga is here with me. David, what's your Twitter? Where can people follow you, stalk you?
Oh, goodness. So if you Google, no, I'm just kidding. If you go to Instagram, you can actually follow me at _David Fraga, or you can go to check me out on www.kingdominitiative.org, which is our website, the primary website of the nonprofit. But thank you guys so much.
We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman. I'm your host today for the Millennial Roundtable. I am joined around the table by David Fraga today with Gateway Ministries. And we just had a great discussion about church's involvement in political issues, and at a time where it seems so contentious and at times really difficult to engage or want to continue engaging when things get really ugly and heated out there. You know, we as believers, what is our duty in politics to engage, and what does that look like? So we talked a little bit philosophically and theologically earlier about that, but really right now we wanted to turn and just say, like, what are practical things our audience right now, if you're listening to this, that you can do to engage in a Christ-like way in politics? And I'll start with, I think discussions like we're having here actually do matter. I think that people having conversations in a loving and winsome way about things that are close to Christ's heart. So caring and loving for our neighbors.
It's good.
Protecting widows and children. That's a foster care system. That's orphanages. That's making sure that the children in schools right now, maybe kids aren't getting meals because they're not able to go to school because of COVID. What does it look like to help serve them in that time? And so actually looking around your community right there in your neighborhood, because we are still pretty limited to our neighborhoods right now, if not your own four walls, and just calling your church and saying, hey, do we have any ministries right now reaching out and checking on kiddos who are still at home? And can I drop off meals at homes or get groceries for my elderly neighbor who doesn't want to go to the grocery store right now? I mean, those are really just tangible, simplistic ways.
For sure.
But beyond that, engaging a little bit more would be register to vote. You have until October 3rd. You have a couple weeks here to say, all right, I'm going to commit. I'm going to go and register to vote, and I'm going to vote based on biblical principles, what that means to you. David, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I think exactly what you said is that posture to serve. And it causes us to be in a place of humility and to actually just lay down ourselves, for the church, for Christ. In other words, all that being said, I really think that a lot of times we miss out on one of the simplest things, and that's literally asking God and listening and the awareness factor. I think that's not even just a factor. That's exactly what it is, because Jesus always says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. In other words, he uses us to release the kingdom here on earth, right? And it's so cool to think about that, because it's just the awareness. That's why I always revert to asking myself questions like, God, like, what's in my heart right now, in my motive in actually pursuing ministry? What am I getting value out of it, or is this to genuinely serve you? Because I don't want this to be about me. It's not about me. It's about something greater, right? I must become less, he must increase, right? I must decrease, he must increase. And so all that being said, I think the awareness in asking not just questions, but asking God and then searching in that. It's an invitation to the mysteries of God, is that what we're invited to literally go into his word, to ask our pastors, and to go into the church and look at those resources and ask God, like, is this of you? Like, just simply as that.
Or even, how have you uniquely equipped me to go serve? And so because, we all have like different talents and spiritual skills that he's gifted us with, or not spiritual skills, just general life skills he's gifted us. If you're really good at whittling, for instance, like disciple somebody in your church. Some people are great at one-on-one. And so just saying like, hey, I commit to discipling like one young man or young woman in my church who like just needs someone. We have a fatherless generation. The generation below us is even more fatherless. Like, what does it look like to just say, I'm going to spend Saturday mornings taking someone to breakfast that needs it? For me, I'm in the life ministry. And so saying, okay, Human Coalition, that's our clinic side. We have healthcare clinics serving women patients who are considering abortion every single day. Like, do you donate? Is it best in your life phase to just donate and be a part of a ministry through supporting it? Because that actually really does make a difference.
Wow, it's so good.
There's so many ways. There was something SMU, a local university here, did. They did an English speaking program for foreign exchange students.
That's so cool.
And I was like, wow, I could really use that and just like read the Bible in English. I didn't end up doing it. I wish I had. But there are like small ways, I think, that are not necessarily overwhelming when you're looking in front of you to like engage in our community and culture.
That's so good. And I think that's the number one thing that when I say we get overwhelmed by content and like so many things that's happening in our lives, this pandemic and this season is an invitation not to go into isolation, but solitude. Solitude involves intimacy, and intimacy is the awareness of what's in front of you. And so it's an opportunity, an invitation to actually see what's on my plate and to prioritize like things in my life that may have been distractions, that may have been places for me to cope emotionally, and really be like, okay, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. What does that actually look like? And to have those discussions within your family, within your neighbors, your neighborhoods, wherever you are, but actually be like, this is what matters. Now more than ever, what was the first thing that the job market did is like, what's essential, basically, right? When they came back. And I think we did that internally, whether we realize it or not. What's essential in our lives right now? I don't have to go to the grocery store, twice a week. I can do it once a week, or something small like that. But in the same way, in church and in ministry, it's like, what is on my plate right now? And who are the people that God has brought into my life for me to serve, to love, to disciple, like you were saying, and open my home to, my life to? Because it's not about us, and it's not about doing things. It's about doing life together in perfect unity,
Yeah, and it's such an opportunity. I always think like the church, historically, it does thrive in times of when there's devastation in the world. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to show like our hope is not in these things. Our hope is not in who wins the election, although I like very strongly have an opinion about it. My hope is not in that. And I might still cry, no matter what. But I know that my hope is in Christ and that he tells us how this is going to go. Like there's going to be like a difficult, Revelation talks about a lot of difficulty in the end times. Like we know there's going to be, pestilence and famine, and there's all these things that are going to happen, but we as a church can do what the church historically does, which is like serve and love others well and thrive in that, because our hope is not in this world.
It's good.
So before we move on, we've got a lot of things we're going to discuss. We are going to get to the passing of the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all that entails, the vacancy, the potential nominee, talk a little bit about her life and legacy there. We will also have Richard at the end of this hour join us. Richard Lim join us by phone out of Washington, D.C. He's our brilliant historian, always brings such an incredible long-term, I think, perspective to our current events. And later in the show, we'll have Rachel Redus out of Houston, and she's got some great political knowledge and background there. So I would love to hear from her. Of course, David will continue on with us. We'll be talking about a little bit of racial justice, but from a historical perspective, really writing history, because we're hearing a lot of like fake history out there. And I want Richard on to set me straight and say, no, George Washington was incredible, and let's be reminded of why. So
Good.
all of those topics will be on and more. You can read them on pointofview.net. Continue to listen or watch us on Point of View Radio on Facebook. David, go ahead. Tell us where people can follow you and a little bit about your ministry. I loved hearing about your Kingdom Initiative.
Absolutely. So, you can follow me on Instagram, primarily is what I use, or Facebook at David Fraga, or at _David Fraga through Instagram. My ministry that the Lord has given me is Kingdom Initiative. So you can find us at kingdominitiative.org. That is kingdominitiative.org. And what we do is really we come alongside ministries and we help bridge the gap in media. We want people to experience God through media. And so we have teams, a network all across the nation where we partner up with ministries and we just share stories of what God is doing in these places. And it's an aspect and an opportunity to give hope. And so that's what we focus on.
I love that. I love that. Well, we are certainly trying to talk about the hopeful aspects of our world this show, because we know everyone's saying a lot that isn't so hopeful out there, but we've got a lot to be excited about. So when we get back from this break, Richard Lim will be with us. I am Chelsey Youman, your host today. I also work with Human Coalition Action, a pro-life advocacy lobbying firm, so working on pro-life legislation. But thanks for joining us for the first hour.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Hello, I'm Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable on Point of View. Happy, beautiful Monday. We are here in Texas where the weather is just incredible, and I hope where you are, it's a beautiful Monday too. We've got David Fraga across the table from me. Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Doing awesome. Glad to be here.
Well, David is involved in Gateway Ministry, and he is here to just keep us theologically sound in our discussion today. We won't stray too far with David around, but we've got a great show prepared for you. Lots of discussion. We've been talking a little bit already about what lies on the line in your vote for the November election, talking about the pro-life issue and what actually can be accomplished by making sure you vote pro-life. But moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about racial history and injustice in our country, because we think that there's a lot of history being rewritten right now. And of course, on the line to talk about that is Richard Lim, our brilliant historian. Hi, Richard. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Richard is the voice and producer of This American President. So he is, I always say, a page of history is worth a volume of logic. And if that's true, Richard Lim is a very logical person because he knows a lot of history. So I'm looking forward to a good discussion with him about that. A little bit later, of course, we're going to talk about the passing of the late Justice Ginsburg, a little bit about her life and legacy, and then, of course, the vacancy that she leaves and what that means for our country and some of the issues around that. So we've got a really good show, I hope, for you all today, all, of course, from a millennial perspective. But first, we're going to just start going ahead and talking about George Washington. Richard posted a brilliant article and had one published recently about really how George Washington's reputation can be redeemed by looking at historically accurate version of the events when he was here and alive as a founder of our country. And George Washington is someone that Richard's very passionate about. So I know he's going to be really excited to talk about this, but we want to talk a little bit about where we are with racial tensions in our country, but how important it is to understand where we came from so we can learn lessons from that and also portray ourselves as Americans in an accurate way, in a holistic way. So thank you, Richard, for being with us today.
Yes, absolutely. And so in the last few weeks, you've seen, actually the last few months, you've seen statues of Washington being toppled or defaced. And I think a lot of this is because of misperceptions about Washington and the founding generation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of modern, scholars, or, if you can call them that, subscribe to the 1619 Project, which is quite frankly inaccurate. It basically seeks to paint broad brushstrokes about the founders and portray them all as pro-slavery, which is completely not true. Many founders were against slavery. Washington, you could argue, made the greatest journey in that regard because many of the founders, while many of them were anti-slavery, they were born in situations where in the North where slavery was less prevalent than in the South. Washington grew up in a slave-holding society, and he came to see slavery as wrong, and he said that he wished for its abolition, and he also came up with schemes to basically free his slaves and hire them out on his land. But he was facing a lot of opposition to that within Virginia, and it was basically a kind of situation where it was very difficult. He was constantly in debt because he was gone from his estate so often, and he basically had to postpone those plans. He was gone from his estate because he was president, and he lost a lot of money in his estate. And at the end of his life, he decided to free his slaves. And so I think that it's very remarkable that a person makes this journey. He's the only major founder to free his slaves. And modern audiences think that these founders should have just eliminated slavery right off the bat. Well, quite frankly, it wasn't possible to do that at the time. The founders, there were dozens of them, and to portray them all in the same way, I think is very ahistorical.
Well, that's a great point, Richard. I actually have a question about that because I am involved in policy and politics, and I remember a little bit about my American history days in school and in college, but really I haven't been briefed recently on this. And so for our audience and listeners out there who are like me, and I won't speak for David, but just don't quite remember all of those little details, can you kind of just walk us through a little bit about the culture at the time and the decisions facing our founding fathers as they established our country and how they were grappling with all of these different areas?
Absolutely. So one thing that's very interesting is that when you look at how America came into being, they call it the American Revolution. But unlike most revolutions, it was a gradual revolution. The British started imposing taxes in the mid-1760s, and it wasn't until 11 years later, after a long process of petition, of writing pamphlets and having full discussions about independence and republicanism, that's when it took them over a decade pretty much to get to the point of saying, we're going to have our own country. And so they understood that if you introduce sudden change into any system, that it could threaten the whole system and it could lead to worse evils than the one you were trying to get rid of. Now, revolutions that have happened since then have not learned that lesson. The French Revolution was an attempt to get rid of all forms of oppression, and it led to worse oppression than it was fighting. And the same thing happened in the communist revolutions of the 20th century. They wanted to get rid of all class distinctions, and it created worse class inequality. So the founders understood that if you tried to change society too quickly, it would destroy the whole system. Now, they sought out to do certain things. They sought out to defeat British tyranny. They sought out to create a new country, establish a government, constitution, and they did that. But they knew that something like slavery, and Lincoln argued this, that if you tried to get rid of slavery immediately, it would uproot the whole system. The country would be weak. It was surrounded by empires, the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, that would seek to destroy the world's first modern republic. And so when people now criticize the founders for not getting rid of slavery, I ask, well, if they would have tried to get rid of slavery then, there would be no country. Mm-hmm. And the South would have broken off from the Union. Slavery would have probably lasted longer in the South. That's what Frederick Douglass himself argued, the great African-American leader. He said, it's good we have a union. It's good that the slave states are binded to the North states, because that way they can influence the country away from slavery. And he understood that it needed time. This was a gradual thing. And so I think the founders understood that. And unfortunately, history's been rewritten to basically say that, they were responsible for all the ills that happened at the time. They should have created a 21st century republic right off the bat, which is absurd.
Yeah, that's just so interesting, Richard. Thank you so much for your perspective. We have to go to one of those quick breaks right now. When we get back, we'll also continue this discussion talking about racial history and inequality in our country, or the conversations around that. David, I know that you'll have a lot to add to that, as David is in ministry, and we're seeing how this plays out currently with those around us in our culture. And millennials, of course, have a lot to say about this issue, are really impassioned about this issue. So don't go anywhere. When you get back, we'll continue the discussion right after this break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
As we get closer to Election Day, some people are asking the what-if question. What if the ballots in some states aren't confirmed by the time the Electoral College meets in December? What if neither presidential candidate wins the Electoral College vote? These are important questions that I hope we don't have to answer in real life, but here is how those questions should be decided according to the Constitution. The procedure is set forth by Article 2 of the Constitution and modified by the addition of the 12th Amendment. The House of Representatives meets to vote for the president, and you might assume that would be good news for Joe Biden since there are more Democrats in that chamber, but this would be the newly elected House members, which may or may not be majority Democrat. If you look at the Constitution, you will see that doesn't matter anyway. Each state delegation gets one vote. California gets one vote, even though they have 52 representatives in Congress, while Wyoming gets one vote. Currently, there are more states with Republicans than Democrats. Assuming those state delegations vote along party lines, that would be good news for Donald Trump. What about the vote for vice president? In this case, the Senate would vote for the vice president. Although it is unlikely, it is possible that the president who is selected and the vice president who is selected could be from different parties. That has happened before in American politics, but not since the 19th century. What if the House of Representatives fails to select the president by Inauguration Day? Well, the 20th Amendment specifies that the vice president-elect becomes the acting president until the House selects a president. But if neither chamber selects a president or vice president, then the Speaker of the House becomes president on Inauguration Day. If you're troubled by all of this, I suggest you start praying that none of this happens and that you make sure you vote this year. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I am Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable. Please join us at Point of View Radio on Facebook. If you would like to watch us live, you can also go to pointofview.net and read up on any of the articles we've been discussing here today. We've got Richard Lim on the line. He is the producer of This American President podcast. I would encourage you right now to download your podcast app. Go look at his podcast. He talks about so many great, interesting stories, things you might not have heard about your presidents before us, relating them to current events that are happening around us now. I've always found it extremely fascinating. So thank you for being with us today, Richard.
Glad to be here.
Richard is unpacking for us a little bit. He's correcting history here. He's telling us a little bit about our founding fathers, where they really were on the issue of slavery and racial divides, and what some of the cultural, political, and unfortunate worldly realities that there were to overcoming slavery at that time, and that it might not have been as practical of a reality as people now looking back, can point to and say, and that many of them were redeemed at the end of their lives. Actually, George Washington specifically freed his slaves and came around to the morality issue there. They turned it around. David, I know you had some questions for Richard, so I want to make sure I give you the floor and give you the chance just to ask Richard whatever you want about this issue.
Absolutely. And Richard, I think I was telling Chelsey earlier that I think the perspective that you bring in is incredible, and I admire that so much. And, talking about some of these, this article specifically, I love this one line that you put in there. It's like, Washington believed slavery was so divisive that it threatened the nation's existence, potentially ending any hope of liberty for all Americans. And I was just asking Chelsey earlier, I was like, do you think, we have this idea of what George Washington, who he is. And a lot of times, so many things in context gets lost in history as it's written, as it's shared, as it's told in story from one person to the other. Like, if you've ever played that game Telephone and you have like a group of 10 people and you say, hey, this is the sentence I want you to tell that person, it changes over time. It changes every time it's passed down unless it's recorded, right? And so I wonder, how often do we as people, and this is the perspective I love to bring in, how often do we as people can almost change a story in order to push a underlying motive or agenda or political thought process of like convincing people this is truth, this is why you need to believe this, and it's almost like selling something to someone. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of with different organizations, different movements taking place in the racial, social justice arena right now, because I think oftentimes we can victimize ourselves in a story in order to villainize someone else to put a divisive issue. And I think even for George Washington and himself, even though he did not agree with so much slavery things and also with so many founding fathers so anti slavery and wanting to end it, I want to ask you, Richard, like, do you think Washington was in that position, like in terms of trying, like he had to maybe live with doing some things that are considered evil or bad in order to accomplish the overall goal, and how so?
Yeah, absolutely. So the important thing is to remember is that the founding fathers were creating a new world out of the old world. And so to them, in order to do that, it wasn't enough to say, oh, this is bad, slavery's bad. Most people would be able to say that, and the founders did write that. And when I say the founders, we're talking about dozens of people. They're all different people. We can't just assume that everyone, they all thought the same, because that's not true. That's not true of any group of people then or now. And so I would say that for them, they saw that it wasn't enough to just have good motives. What mattered was prudence. What mattered was you can say something is immoral, but then getting rid of it is a whole different story. That's the argument Lincoln made. He was not an abolitionist. He didn't side with the people that said end slavery now, but he was anti-slavery. And he said the only way that we could keep this last best hope for the world, this republic, to sustain it, is to deal with the slavery issue wisely. And so he compared slavery to this kind of a strange metaphor, but this is what he said. He said it was like a snake in a nursery. If a snake is in a nursery with a lot of kids, it's obviously a danger. You want to get the snake out. But if you attack the snake, it's going to bite back. It could end up killing the kids. So what you do is lure the snake out. And so when we say that, the founders had to do certain things that are considered evil now, I don't think they looked at it that way. They said, well, if we try to be absolutist about it, you could end up causing worse harm to society and to the world, really. And so they saw that as an evil that they were preventing. And it's easy in hindsight to say, oh, well, they should have done this, they should have done that. But they were doing the best they could with the situation that they have. And this is where I think when it comes to history, the Christian worldview is absolutely critical, because the Christian worldview says that there are moral truths, there's right and wrong, and so we have to accept that. These are rules that come from God and not from us. But at the same time, we also say, well, but instead of me looking at someone else and saying, oh, I know what they should have done, one should look at it and say, well, every founding father was a sinner, a fallen sinner like myself, and so how would I like someone 200 years ago to judge me? And how do I look at this person and judge them? First of all, knowing that they're a sinner and they're not perfect, but also knowing that this person was dealing with constraints and limitations and realities. And when we look at our lives today and think of all the ideals that we wish we could fulfill right now, but all of us are failing to fulfill, well, guess what? That's what the founders struggled with as well. And so they were dealing with limited information. They were dealing with, didn't have any of the hindsight that we have today. And so when I look at it that way, that's where the Christian worldview becomes critical, because instead of looking self-righteously at historical figures, we can look at them and say, yeah, I can evaluate them for the good things and the bad things that they did and know that they were human just like me. But also to say, but, even where that person fails, I'm not sure that I would have been much better than them. Maybe in some cases we might have made better decisions than them, but often that's because of hindsight. And so this is where I think history needs that Christian perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and to talk about history from a Christian perspective instead of saying, oh, these founding fathers, what a bunch of idiots. Anyone now knows slavery is wrong. Why didn't, well, it's a matter of prudence, and it's a matter of what did they know at the time.
Richard, I love that you tie all that together so neatly and concisely for me and for our audience. But we were talking a little bit earlier on the show, too, about the need for unity in a time of deep division in our country and just how difficult election years are on us as an American people. It just brings out our differences. And we were also talking about, though, that many people have the same goal in mind. We all want betterment in society. And then the way we accomplish that goal, the way we accomplish better health, better economy, better safety, better civil rights, all of those things are just done in very different ways. But to remember, for the sake of unity, to assume kind of the best. But when I think of how far we've come as a country, it's important to talk about where we've been and the realities of that horrific time for so many slaves, where an entire population based on their race endured, the worst that there was in the world to offer, but to look at that and learn from that. And that's why history is so important, is because we have a duty to grow from that and continue to point to that what it is. I read a study this week that said 60% of people in my generation and the generation below me don't really know what the Holocaust was. That's horrific to me, because we have to look at our history. We have to know, where we were to understand where we need to continue to go and to continue to eradicate certain prejudices. But also with like a little bit of hope when I look and hear when you're talking, Richard, about the way things were, how far we've come. We've really come a long way since in the last over 270 years. And when I look at what you're saying, the injustices around us now, the issues around us now, for me, the predominant one's going to always come back to abortion. There is hope for us as a country to look at that and eradicate it someday, in spite of the obstacles in our way, both in terms of policy and politics and the constraints we have as a society. Like, there is hope that someday we're going to look at that for the moral evil that it is, and it will be gone. And I hope it's more than in my lifetime. I hope it's next year. But when we get back, I so appreciate Richard Lim is still going to be with us on the phone. David Fraga will also continue with me here around the Millennial Roundtable. We are going to turn our discussion a little bit to talking about Justice Ginsburg, the life she led, a little bit about her legacy, and then later in this segment, of course, the vacancy and filling that vacancy. So stay with us. Don't go anywhere. You can watch us live on Point of View Radio on Facebook. Go to pointofview.net and read Richard's incredible article about George Washington being redeemed in the eyes of history, and also any of the topics we've talked about today. So stay with us. Don't go anywhere.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, welcome back. I am Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable on this beautiful Monday. We have no Monday scaries or blues over here, do we, David? We are just hitting the road running with tons of topics, tons of news to talk about from our millennial perspective, which we have a lot of perspective. So I'm grateful to have you in studio today, David. He is with Gateway Ministries, and he has his own ministry, the Kingdom Initiative, which you can go find at kingdominitiative.org. Thank you for being with us today, David.
Absolutely. It's such a joy to be here and just to talk about so many amazing topics and bring in some fresh perspective, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely fresh because we're young millennials. Richard, thank you for being with us. You are on the phone. Richard Lim. He is the producer and voice of This American President podcast. Get your podcast app out. Go download it right now. It's always interesting to hear historical things about our president's stories, just tales that I've typically never heard before. So thank you, Richard, for always bringing just your interesting take to the Millennial Roundtable.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Well, we have been talking a little bit about not necessarily race relations in our country, but really about how history is being rewritten and reformed through a different lens right now. And Richard spent a great deal of time just correcting the record on that. What did our founding fathers actually think about racism? What were some of and slavery, and what were some of their obstacles to overcoming that at the time? The practical, political, unfortunate realities of that day when it came to eradicating the evil that was slavery. But we just loved hearing that perspective. So if you want to hear what we discussed, go back pointofview.net. You can look at the articles. Richard's article is posted there, as well as the other issues we've talked about today. But now we're going to turn to something everybody, I'm sure, has heard by now that happened last Friday. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg did pass away last Friday from years and years long battle of pancreatic cancer. Her family is obviously grieving, and her colleagues and the whole world really was saddened to hear about her death. I know, especially as an attorney, in my circles, that especially women really are really grieving the loss of her because of how much she paved the way for women. So I do want to talk a little bit about her life and legacy, whether you disagree with her or not, which I frankly did disagree with a lot of her judicial philosophies. We still have to lend credence to her brilliant legal mind and everything that she did accomplish against all odds, speaking of cultural constraints, as a woman for her time. So in 1971, these are a list of things that women could not do. They could not get a credit card in their own name. They couldn't serve as a jury. They could not have equal family housing or benefits from their husband if they served in the military. A lot of them couldn't work if they were pregnant or couldn't work at all. When she graduated law school, she was not hired from multiple firms, even though she was top in her class at Harvard. She was top in her class when she transferred to Columbia Law School to support her husband's legal career, he was also a Harvard attorney. She couldn't get a job, even though she had outstanding credentials and intellect, because she was a woman. And so all of those things changed in the 70s when she took over the ACLU's Women's Rights Division and litigated those cases before the Supreme Court and stood up for women's rights. So in terms of women's equality and so many of the benefits that women's reap today, including not being discriminated against in the workplace or pregnancy discrimination, we can really thank Justice Ginsburg's work for that. So those are the things I wanted to highlight. I know that the country is spinning. What does this mean for us? Where are we going to go from here? And of course, we're going to discuss that in a few minutes. But I just wanted to talk about the fact that she was a brilliant legal mind. And then one of my personal favorite things that I've heard from Justice Scalia's son, so Chris Scalia and his brother both have articles out about their father's relationship. Justice Scalia's relationship was so unique with Justice Ginsburg. So if our audience remembers, Justice Scalia was a originalist, conservative, constitutionalist. He was just really devout on the constitutional issues. He actually this is me legally nerding out, so forgive me guys, but he came up with like a methodology for how to analyze statutes in the most constitutional way possible. I've read it. Nobody else here will think it's that interesting, but he just was as true and tried as they come on making sure that jurisprudence was resolved in the most constitutional way that we can possibly resolve it. And Justice Ginsburg really cared about equality and civil rights in a way that might trump, the constitutional methods, or she really pushed the bounds of the Constitution. Let's grow it. Let's change it. Pretty much the exact opposite judicial philosophy of Justice Scalia. Y'all, these two individuals were very close family friends. They spent every New Year's Eve together. Their families traveled together. They, during the summers, took trips together. I have a picture on my phone of Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg riding an elephant in India together. I mean, for two people in a time, I think it's a beautiful picture in a time where our country is being so divided and our differences are all really at the surface, to see a beautiful example of how we can still be united and have different philosophies and at the end of the day come together. So those are a few things that stood out to me about Justice Ginsburg and her life, besides being an extraordinary jurist and the legacy she did lead, even though, as I mentioned, I'll be intellectually honest here. I do disagree with her stance on abortion and many other things. That you still have to say she was a brilliant legal mind, and there's so much for her family, to mourn during this loss. Richard, you're on the line. Do you have anything to add about Justice Ginsburg's legacy, or any stories that have stood out to you in the news cycle the last few days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all Americans, I believe, wish the loved ones of Justice Ginsburg, her family, her friends, we all wish them comfort in this time. I mean, death is an awful, sad reality of our fallen world, and so we mourn the loss of all. We know our Lord does not take delight in death, so that's something I think all Christians can unite around. I think it's one of those things when you study history, you study figures that you like and you study figures that you don't like, but you learn that figures that you don't like, sometimes they did some good things. And you learn that figures that you do like sometimes did bad things. And so I think one can assess her career in its totality. One can say that, well, she rose during a time where women didn't enjoy many of the rights that they have now, and she was someone who had to fight against that for herself and her own career, but also fought for that for the rest of all the other women in America as well. And so we can give her credit there. We can also scrutinize her record as a justice, and where we disagree with her, people who are pro-life have every reason and right to disagree with her stances there. But I think it's a healthy thing when you see people like Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg being friends. And I think that, that's a great thing. It's kind of a cathartic thing. It's refreshing. And so I think that speaks a lot to them. But I think that when we assess her career, that this is what you do. This is the job of the historian, to assess it, warts and all, the good, the bad. And so when I study presidents, there are presidents that I don't like very much, but sometimes I have to say, he got it right in this area. And so that's what I would say when it comes to Justice Ginsburg's legacy.
Well, thank you, Richard. David, did you have anything you wanted to add about her legacy, or things that you've maybe seen over the last few days?
Not too much, other than just I felt like you guys educated me so much more, because I didn't know too much in depth about all those policies. But what is fascinating, and I love that there was just a culture of honor between those two justices. And I think it's so cool just to see them like, we're different. We come from different backgrounds. We are different in that capacity, but yet like we can still have these discussions. We can still have this healthy tension in order to potentially come to a resolution to continue leading this nation, right? So, I really like that, and it's been really cool just to hear Al's perspective.
Yes, I mean, the first thing that I got text from a lot of people who aren't necessarily in the legal realm are like, what does this mean? Or what, a lot of the general public, might not have personally known about her that much. They might have recognize her name, but she is one of the 9 Supreme Court justices.
Right.
And, that's certainly like the highest position you can possibly have as an attorney, and a brilliant, brilliant legal mind. So I'm grateful for y'all's perspectives on that. When we get back after this upcoming break, we are going to talk about really the answer to that question that people were texting me. What does this mean right now tangibly for our country? The timing of this is just very... It's a difficult time. I mean, for the entire country to grapple with something like this, let alone 41 days before an election. So it's certainly going to be interesting what all this means. But we'll try to unpack that a little bit after we get back. I don't know that we have all the answers, but we'll certainly pontificate over here about some of that. Thank you for joining us today. You can read any of the articles we've talked about on pointofview.net today. Again, on the line, we have Richard Lim of This American Podcast. You can download his podcast and listen to just really interesting stories about our presidents you probably have not heard before. And then David Fraga, who's with Gateway Ministries here. He just brings such a simplicity and truth and wisdom to everything we talk about. So thanks for being with us, David. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. I'm Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable. We have been discussing the passing of the late Justice Ginsburg, as the whole world is right now, especially in America, and so many people on any side of the aisle, her colleagues, friends, even unknown people who didn't know her are just grieving her loss this week, and respect just this incredible, brilliant career that she had, and her accomplishments. And we were talking right before the break, what a great example of unity she was for our country. As one of her best and nearest and dearest friends was her former colleague, the late Justice Scalia, where they took vacations as families together. They spent every New Year's together. They attended the opera together. It's just a beautiful picture of how, as two people as opposite in beliefs, ideology, and even constitutional construction could possibly go. Their opinions on divisive issues were as far apart as you could imagine, but yet they were still this beautiful picture of unity and friendship and respect. And so for our country, we've been talking a lot, David and I, on this show about how we're hopeful for our country. Everybody is, if you turn on the radio, our divisions are really highlighted right now, and the areas we disagree with our neighbors are very highlighted right now, and frankly can be discouraging to watch. But when you look at a picture of Justice Ginsburg and Scalia and their friendship, and the kindness and the mutual respect that's there, it's really encouraging, and something that I think is something that we should all just point out and celebrate. I do want to turn now to what the Supreme Court vacancy means for our country, because many people text me immediately and were like, what does this mean? Who is she again? And so if you didn't know her, she was one of the 9 Supreme Court justices. There are 9. Traditionally, right now, the makeup of the court has been 4 more liberal-leaning justices, and she was one of them. 4 more conservative-leaning justices, for lack of a better word. Judges aren't supposed to be liberal or conservative, but let's be honest, they are. And then 1 justice who tends towards the middle of the road at this juncture, and that's Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice on the court. He's mostly conservative, but sometimes he'll align with the liberal bloc. So what that means right now is the makeup of the Supreme Court. President Trump has the opportunity to fill his 3rd vacancy, which I think is historically notable and has not, I don't remember the last time, Richard, you should probably enlighten me, a president even had 3 vacancies in 8 years to fill, let alone 1 term. And the significance of that, and then really just to shift the makeup of the Supreme Court for a lifetime here. I mean, his appointments they're going to be on for life. These people, if he appoints someone who is 45 or 50, they have 30 to 40, maybe more years on the court. And that's an incredible legacy they'll be able to have. But also just remember how the shape of jurisprudence, they can shape our entire nation for centuries. So that's really, really important. I can't overstate how important this seat really is, and not for the election, but for us as a people, and what this means for our lives in the future. So, Richard, do you have anything to add on just this large-scale perspective of what this means for us?
Well, actually, the last president to have 3 vacancies was Obama, because he had, that was when Souter, Stevens,
that's right,
Scalia, but of course, those were over his 2 terms. And President H.W. Bush had 2 within his few years. I think Carter was the last one that had literally none. But a lot of those, Reagan had, 1, 2, 3, 4 in his 2nd term, just 1 in his 1st term. Yeah. So anyways, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, 3, especially in a very divided Supreme Court where literally issues dealing with basic fundamental rights come down to 1 vote or 2 at the most. So the big talk right now that people are saying is Mitch McConnell and his desire to fill in the court, and President Trump as well to fill in Ginsburg's seat. And there's a lot of misperception out there about exactly what the precedents are. A lot of people on the left are saying that it's hypocritical for McConnell to do that because he was calling for basically the people to decide in 2016. That ignores history. The fact of the matter is that when the Senate and the presidency are held by 2 different parties, in election years, 9 out of 10 times that court pick was not confirmed. Even though presidents did try to nominate someone, as Obama did with Garland. And so that's what happened there. But 9 out of 10 times in American history, when the presidency and the Senate are in the same hands, the same party, in an election year, even including lame duck sessions, the president's nominee has been confirmed. And so that's the difference here. if President Trump goes on and nominates someone and the Senate confirms it, that would be in line with history. And so now it is closer. This vacancy has happened closer to Election Day than only one other time. But that's not the point. It's 45 days until the election, and nominations have sailed by Congress. One of Lincoln's his Supreme Court justice appointee for the top position, the Chief Justice, took 1 day to approve. This was in the Civil War. It took 1 day. And so when people say, it's 45 days, it's not enough time, well, it's not enough time because people want a grandstand. So history's on the side of this person being confirmed.
That's really, really true. I think because a lot of people, they vaguely remember, they'll look back to right before the 2016 election and say, wait a minute, was one approved then? Wasn't there a guy when Obama was reelected that it didn't happen? But you're right. The reasons for the nominees not being confirmed right before those election seasons was for the fact that the Senate was not held by the same party that the White House was. And that's a meaningful difference in constitutionally speaking. So not to nerd out too much, but I'm going to just end this segment with this, which is, it is the constitutional duty of the presidency to nominate justices and judges, and it is the Senate's constitutional duty to, what the verbiage is, to advise and confirm. And so when a party holds the Senate, we have elected them as our governing officials. When we've elected a president, it's to do their job, which is to nominate and confirm. And that's not optional. It's mandated in the Constitution. This is like a law that came 200 years later. And so when the Senate is not in alignment with the White House, it's because the people have really voted senators in to do their job. And at that phase, it was to say, we don't want this guy elected. And now we have a Senate majority. The Senate gained the seats last election cycle because it's a referendum on how the president is doing. The Republican was in office. They wanted Republicans in the Senate. And now they have a duty to do their constitutional duties, which is to nominate and confirm the justice. And then I'll also add just one point that I thought Senator Ted Cruz made that was really interesting. Was he said, we cannot have a 4-4 judiciary right now going into this election because Democrats have said if they don't win, they're going to challenge. And he was, if you guys remember back when Florida was the big state versus Gore versus Bush, we didn't have a president for 37 days. They didn't know the results of that election. Well, Ted Cruz litigated those cases. And so he has a very up close personal experience with what it looks like when our country is left in disarray because of challenges to who wins the election. And with Democrats saying they're openly going to challenge that, we need a judiciary who's ready to go, lined up, and not 4-4, but all 9, so that we don't have a split court there. So really important. But Richard, before we go to break, thank you for being with us today. I want to make sure that you can tell everyone where they can find you, where they can get your podcast, a little bit about yourself real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So This American President, that's the podcast. You could literally look it up, just thisamericanpresident.com. You can go on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts and check it out. We're having a lot of pretty cool guests, and we're in the middle of a Cold War series and looking into, we're about to do Kennedy. We just did Eisenhower. So
fascinating. Well, thank you so much, Richard Lim, for being with us. Stay tuned. We've got more after this break.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman. Welcome to Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable on this Monday afternoon. We are just having a great time over here in studio. With me, I have David Fraga. Welcome to the show, David.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
David is with Gateway Ministries, and he just always brings such a good perspective, a grounding perspective for us when I get too excited about politics. But David has a great way of applying it to our lives and, making sure all of our discussions just what we put pen to paper and, what does this really mean for us on a daily basis? So we have had a pretty robust show already. If you want to go back and listen from the beginning, we've talked about voting pro-life in this election, what your vote would actually do from just a tangible, practical, political perspective. When you go cast that vote for the presidency, it really does make a difference for lives. And that article can be found on pointofview.net. We also talked about writing history and what is viewing history through the accurate lens with Richard Lim, where we talked about racism and slavery with our founding fathers and really some enlightening conversations for me, at least, on where we've been as a country. And then, of course, we've been talking about the passing of the late Justice Ginsburg, and we talked about her legacy and all of the wonderful things that she was able to accomplish with her stellar career and her brilliance. And she definitely is going to be mourned by loved ones, and then people who didn't even know her are mourning her. But we, of course, are going to turn to what does that mean for you and I, and this, not just this election cycle, but the Supreme Court vacancy. What are the real implications of that? And so with me today, David Fraga, thank you for joining us. David, you had some questions out the gate about what the Supreme Court vacancy means, and I would love to just start with those, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely, and I'd love for you just to eventually, as I ask these questions, can just provide a little bit more context to just not just me, but our listeners as well.
Sure.
In terms of the significance of our vote. Like I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of times we get so overwhelmed by just content and so many campaign ads and everything. We're like, okay, yes, I want to be pro-life, but there's also all these other issues that I don't agree on, or how do I bring this back biblically to the Bible? It's almost like I can't win here, in their minds. But the reality is, I think it's easy to try to go down a path less traveled, the easy route per se, like to not wrestle with these things. And really, I think it's just an invitation for the church to engage, like we talked about earlier, for us to ask questions and to really just, with open hands, have these discussions. And be okay with the tension of some of these discussions, and including, we see that with the relationship of the justice, the two justices we talked about earlier. And it's just so significant that they were able to butt heads, yet be friends.
Right.
Break bread still together and continue to lead this nation, right? And so I guess the question right now is, how significant is really our vote coming up in November? How significant, like, what can I do to engage more in that and learning more?
Well, the first thing you can do is vote, register. So you've got to register. Okay. Every state has a different deadline. In Texas, it's October 3rd, usually before early voting. So make sure you're registered to vote. But your question about how significant is your vote really? it was already incredibly important. And then now with an opening on the Supreme Court, it's even more so because we all know we have three branches of government, right? We've got the presidency, which is the executive, the legislative, and then we've got the judicial branch, which is, and the Supreme Court is the top of that. So not only has President Trump nominated over 250 judges to the lower courts, think about this. The Supreme Court only takes less than 1% of cases before it. So they take small amounts of cases.
It's a big filter.
Yeah, so the lower courts really are, I think they're really significant and often overlooked. The district court and then circuit court are the lower court levels. And then by the time you get up to the Supreme Court, I mean, we're talking less than 1% of the cases. But now, I said earlier, this leaves the entire makeup of the Supreme Court is going to be decided by the next nomination because they were divided in the middle. 4 liberal justices, 4 more conservative-leaning justices, 1 in the middle, and now one of those liberal justice seats is open. And because of that, conservatives really have a chance to vote for the president who will fill that seat with a conservative judge who values the things that we strongly tout, like religious liberty, our civil rights issues. We all have civil rights issues as a nation we can unify around, but abortion is at the top of everyone's mind. I mean, people care a lot about the Supreme Court, mostly because of Roe versus Wade. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that overturning Roe versus Wade is a possibility. And we can talk a little bit later about the short list of of President Trump's nominees, but it is a significant vote you're casting in November. The stakes are high. And if you didn't know that already, go just register to vote and look up these issues. I don't want to be, too don't want to be too bipartisan. There are lots of ways as Christians we can grapple with political issues and land in different places. But I always look at which issues have the highest moral implications. So what is really going to actually harm Americans? For me, life is at the top of that list. The biggest moral implication of that is children are dying. So it's very extreme and important and should be very motivating. But I do want to turn to Rachel, who is on the line with us now. She's calling in. I'm so grateful to have her on our show. Hi, Rachel. Are you on the line?
Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
Thank you for joining us. Rachel, go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, so I'm 24. Right now I work full-time for Senator Cruz on the campaign side of things. I graduated from Sam Houston State in 2018 with a animal science pre-veterinary degree, and somehow I ended up in politics, but, I wouldn't change it. It's been a pretty awesome ride so far, so.
Well, that's incredible. I'm also an Aggie, so I'm going to go ahead and say whoop to that. You guys are all outnumbered, but thank you for joining us today, Rachel. We're talking a little bit about Justice Ginsburg, and we talked about her unique friendship with Justice Scalia and the legacy she led. I highlighted the points for women because that's, mostly what I was excited about. I will be honest, I disagreed with a lot of her opinions and judicial philosophies, but she still had a very brilliant legal career. What are your initial thoughts? Were there any stories over the last few days you've heard that have particularly stood out to you about Justice Ginsburg?
Like you said, being one of the first women on the Supreme Court is, despite different, political views that people might hold, I think it's always, there's always some great things to look at whenever it comes to even people on different sides of the aisle. And she, has been sitting in that position, for a really long time and was one of the first women. And so for women's rights, I think that was like a really, that's kind of something that stuck out to me, before anything else is just, we've made it so far in the past, not even few decades. And she's kind of like a beacon for that.
That's so true. That's so true. Well, thank you, Rachel. We've got to go to one of those breaks. When we get back, Rachel's going to continue on the line with us. I love what you're saying there when you really think about how much has been accomplished for our country in the last few decades. It's really actually hopeful, like how far we can continue to go and grow as a country. And just to remind ourselves, we've been talking on this show about how good America really is, how great the American spirit is. And I'm really confident in that. And Justice Ginsburg's life is an example of that. So continue with us when we get back after the break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
As we get closer to Election Day, some people are asking the what-if question. What if the ballots in some states aren't confirmed by the time the Electoral College meets in December? What if neither presidential candidate wins the Electoral College vote? These are important questions that I hope we don't have to answer in real life, but here is how those questions should be decided according to the Constitution. The procedure is set forth by Article 2 of the Constitution and modified by the addition of the 12th Amendment. The House of Representatives meets to vote for the president, and you might assume that would be good news for Joe Biden since there are more Democrats in that chamber, but this would be the newly elected House members, which may or may not be majority Democrat. If you look at the Constitution, you will see that doesn't matter anyway. Each state delegation gets one vote. California gets one vote, even though they have 52 representatives in Congress, while Wyoming gets one vote. Currently, there are more states with Republicans than Democrats. Assuming those state delegations vote along party lines, that would be good news for Donald Trump. What about the vote for vice president? In this case, the Senate would vote for the vice president. Although it is unlikely, it is possible that the president who is selected and the vice president who is selected could be from different parties. That has happened before in American politics, but not since the 19th century. What if the House of Representatives fails to select the president by Inauguration Day? Well, the 20th Amendment specifies that the vice president-elect becomes the acting president until the House selects a president. But if neither chamber selects a president or vice president, then the Speaker of the House becomes president on Inauguration Day. If you're troubled by all of this, I suggest you start praying that none of this happens and that you make sure you vote this year. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to watch us live, you can go to Point of View Radio on Facebook and watch us live. You can also go to pointofview.net and read up on the articles that we've discussed today. In studio, I have David Fraga with me, and then on the line is Rachel with the Senator Cruz's campaign. So thank you guys for all being here and sharing your millennial perspectives with us today.
For sure. Very excited to be here.
Great. Well, we've been talking a little bit about Justice Ginsburg, her passing, but also what does this mean? David is just asking some really great questions, which I love because they're questions everyone's been asking lately. So just go for it, David. What's your next question on the list about the Supreme Court vacancy and what it means for our country?
Man, I have just a question about the nomination process. Mm-hmm. And even like what Trump is going through right now in terms of that process. Like, is he going to announce things? I don't know. So that's kind of like just a simple question, but it has a lot of depth. I can.
Right. I mean, it's like very practical next step question.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Essentially, the Constitution, this is one of the few things the Constitution actually does spell out that the president has to do and the Senate has to do. And that is the president has to nominate judges for the judiciary and the Senate has to provide what they call advice and consent in the Constitution, which means they have to consider the nominee and ultimately confirm. So that is the constitutional duty that we have elected these officials to do. I know there's a lot of back and forth. We already talked about Mitch McConnell in 2016 and, you know, do we confirm this close to an election? We've already discussed that, but the answer is history is on our side for that. The Senate has a Republican majority. There's a Republican in the White House, and historically you confirm in that situation. So moving past that, what it looks like is President Trump he is one of the few presidents who has actually released a list of nominees ahead of time, which is, there's a lot of transparency in that. I highly respect that, actually. So those nominees have been vetted to a certain extent already by his White House counsel and his team there and his trusted advisors. What will happen is they've already basically said that they are going to go ahead and nominate before the election. And that it will be a woman. The White House released that it will be a woman. So there's 3 women they think are going to be contenders. We can talk about that in a minute. But before we get there, to finish this process, President Trump, I think this is such a class act. He is waiting until Justice Ginsburg's funeral to make his nomination, which, yes, puts more time constraints, but really depoliticizes this. And I really respect that. I mean, he gets a lot of heat, our listeners know, for tweets and things he says that are not, politically correct or said in the right way, frankly. But he really wants to honor her and has said that. He has multiple times talked about what an amazing life she led. I think that's just incredible. David, what do you think about the fact he's waiting to nominate?
I think it's incredible. I think it's humanizing, the whole thing. And it's I think one of the quotes that we were talking about, during a break was that it's not all about the votes, basically. There's more to life than the votes. And I think just basically leading this aspect of grieving, in a healthy way is just so healthy. We don't grieve in transitions a lot of times. And because of that, it's like it can all feel overwhelming when we need to grieve, in a hard transition, a hard ending of something, of a legacy, whatever it is. But it continues to carry on when we're able to grieve and remember. It's just so important. It's just very, very vital. And I think there's just so much value in the pause. If we really think about it, this whole pandemic and everything going on of importance this year, we've been allowed to, what we talked about earlier, prioritize things, to pause. And everything has been disrupted. We don't like that because there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of things that we feel like are rubbing us the wrong way, right? But because of that, it allows us to, evaluate, and allows us to humanize and not be so transactional, but be relational.
Exactly. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on that? Well, I'm not sure if Rachel's still with us, but yes, I couldn't agree more with you. Just, it would be so tempting as the president this close to the election. His whole party is pushing him to fill the seat. And for him to stop and say, like, the priority really here is human, and to allow her friends, colleagues, relatives, and the country a moment to just grieve and process.
It's honoring.
It's very honoring, and I'm proud of him. So to answer your question, what does the process look like? He's delaying the process a little bit, but not in a huge way. I mean, he's waiting a week, but he does have a short list. There are it's going to be women from the list according to what he's committed to, and then he will put forth the nomination formally, and then the Senate Judiciary Committee will take that nomination, and we've seen as a country can be really a brutal process. We saw it with Justice Kavanaugh, but they pour over all of the nominees' opinions, drafted, unpublished opinions, anything that they wrote in law school or once when they were 7 years old, a tweet, like everything comes out. It's a full vetting process. I think there were like literally a million pieces of paper for Kavanaugh. So I'm hoping that this nominee, will at least, they'll treat her like a human. I hope, she's about to put her family on the line for this. And so I still hope there's like respect and bipartisanship. It's a bipartisan unanimous vote at the end. They're either qualified or not, and we move on. But I know this close to an election, it's probably going to get really contentious. So we got to buckle up as a country and say, what are our priorities here? Are they qualified? Can they serve this office well and with honor and respect? And intellect, and we move on. Now, we all have the issues we care about on the conservative side of the aisle. The number one question is going to be, what would they do with Roe versus Wade? What would they do if the election in November, which actually Senator Cruz, Rachel, really mentioned, I loved this point he made on Fox, which was, the Democrats have already said they're going to contest if they lose this election. And Senator Cruz litigated Gore versus Bush, if y'all remember, way back in the day. And we didn't have our presidential answer on who that person was to run our country for 37 days. And so he said, we can't have a 4-4 court. We need a vote in the middle. So, Rachel, we're talking a little bit about the process here. And we also talked about President Trump delaying the announcement until after Justice Ginsburg passes as a way to honor her and just not move too quickly to politicize this. Do you have any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute, and I didn't notice. I was going to say, regarding the funeral and waiting until after the funeral, I think that's like a very honorable thing to do. Again, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, I think it's just about respect in that manner. And I know y'all were talking about the administration was saying it was going to be a woman, which is really awesome. I think actually the Trump administration has given a lot of opportunity to women. That's the most opportunity, I think, in an administration that's been given to women. Kellyanne Conway is an example for the first woman to successfully run a presidential campaign. And then we have Kayleigh McEnany, and then, all of the other women that are under the Trump administration. So I think that's, an awesome thing for them to be doing as well, is kind of saying, look, we're going to give more opportunity to women because, we can do we can do things just like, everybody else can. So I think it's awesome. I think that's another thing to, in regards to like campaigning, to pull over women voters and really say, like, this is the Trump administration is not concerned for women, but supports women. And I think that that's a very helpful.
Right. Women are 50% of the population. I don't consider myself a minority. And so having that representation publicly is so important. We have a caller from Maine. Bobby is on the line. Bobby, do you have any questions for us? Oh, we lost him. Well, we have a break we're going to get to, but we'll talk a little bit more about this confirmation, and then we're going to turn to just what it looks like as a country for our nation to kind of come together during an election year. The theme of this show has been, we have a lot to look forward to. We are really being dragged through the mud right now in the media, and there's a lot of divisions. All of our differences are at the surface right now. We all have our own opinions, the way we like things. And some of those are right, some of those are wrong. But at the end of the day, what is unity as a country? I think we all desire what's best for America, and we all desire unity for our country. And this is just another way, an example that we have to look forward to. A new judicial nominee allows the court to have a change and some fresh new judicial philosophies, but hopefully one that can ground us in our civil rights. I'm hopeful it's one that will protect life. And our vote for that reason is more important than ever. If it wasn't already super important, get registered to vote, audience. This is the voting block we want out there, just to vote for values, to vote for human dignity and all of the things we care about, to vote for policies that are going to help our brothers and sisters, which is what our ultimate goal is always to do. So if you weren't motivated before, I do think that this is more motivating than ever to just know what's at stake out there. So after this, we will still have Rachel on the line. Rachel will continue with us. David will continue in studio, and we'll turn to more unity discussions about our country and, really ways we're going to make it through this election cycle, but we're going to do it together. And that's the goal.
Let's go.
Thank you for being with us. Stay tuned.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Good afternoon and good Monday. I'm Chelsey Youman, your host today for the Millennial Roundtable. And with me, I've got David Fraga, who's in ministry at Gateway Church. Thanks for being here, David.
Absolutely. It's a joy to be here.
Great. I also have Rachel Redus on the line, and she is with Senator Cruz's campaign. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
We are having a conversation, of course, about the late Justice Ginsburg, and whether we disagree with her or not, we can all agree that she was a brilliant legal mind and did a lot for civil rights in our country. And as our country grieves, we're sensitive to that. But we also are discussing, like, what does that mean for our country? What does this process look like moving forward? I've got a couple of things I'm going to highlight, and then we will move on. But I wanted to highlight who is on the short list. So President Trump released a list of 20 names, give or take. He had a list last election cycle. Actually, just a few weeks ago, he put out his new list for who his Supreme Court potential nominees would be. I love that. It's transparency. As a voter, I know he has stuck to that list. He's been consistent, and he has had an outstanding record. If you're a constitutional conservative, if you care about, your constitutional rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, abortion and protecting life, if you care about those issues, his nominees are really unmatched. They're well vetted with conservative records. So I really actually think that is one thing as a voter that I can really count on the president for as a conservative Republican. Regardless of how you feel about other things that he says or does, you can count on his judicial nominees, and that's very important. It's our third branch of government. On his list, he said he would nominate a woman. And he's committed to that, which, of course, as a woman, I love. As a female, only 1 in 3 attorneys are women. So we're outnumbered in the profession. But to have women on the court at the highest level is important, but especially conservative constitutional women. I think that's great. So the 3 we're looking at is former Florida Supreme Court Justice Barbara Lagoa. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. He nominated her to the 11th Circuit a few years ago. So she's only been on that court for a while, but she has been a justice before and has an incredible conservative record. The other nominee, you've probably heard her name, is 7th Circuit Judge Amy Coney Barrett. She was a law professor at Notre Dame University and has a really great record. I love that she's already got opinions on the books. Both of these women do. And I know that seriously has to be the consideration, is that we know where they stand on many issues.
Absolutely.
And then as a private attorney, they have just go look up their records. Really incredible cases. I'm going to nerd out if I go too far into it. But the third being Allison Jones Rushing, and she was sworn in to the 4th Circuit 2 years ago. So she also has a couple of years under her belt at the circuit appellate court level. And she was formerly with ADF, which is a Christian organization that stands up for all kinds of your constitutional rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. They stand up for traditional family values, and they also stand up for life. And so for me, her coming out of that organization, that's indicative of a great track record. Although I don't know any of these women personally and can't speak for them professionally, but those are the 3 that we think are maybe the final contenders. Go Google them, look them up. They're fascinating women. I do have a caller from Georgia who I think wants to talk about these women. Jeannie is on the line with us, and I'm so grateful to have you calling in, Jeannie. Thanks for joining the show.
You're welcome. And I want to just give you accolades for doing a great job, and also that you stay on topic.
Oh, thank you.
And I had a 2-pronged question.
Sure.
One is, do you think it's the best idea to nominate a person because of their sex, or the person who would do the best job? And I am a woman, so I was looking at it from a perspective of desiring the best person for the job, not deciding by sex. The second thing is, since a woman will be nominated, do you think that a woman is going to be able to withstand all of the criticism, the lies, and the things that Kavanaugh went through, and be able to withstand all of that?
Well, those are great questions, Jeannie. Thank you so much for asking them. They're really important. I think there's some good distinctions to make here because no matter the gender or sex of anyone on his Supreme Court nomination list, these are stellar candidates across the board. I personally know maybe half a dozen or more of the people on the list. They have stellar legal careers, brilliant legal minds, solid track records with the cases that they've litigated. And then for those already on the court, we have published opinions to go off of. So based on merit alone, the list is ready. From there, it's a question of, I think, prudence or preference. Amy Coney Barrett was a serious contender last time around. So I think it's only natural that this time around she's still being considered on the list. Another argument is that Justice Ginsburg was a woman on the court, and so it would make sense to fill the seat with another woman. I know that, Rachel, you were talking to me about this a little bit earlier. Do you have any thoughts on the gender or sex of the nominee being important?
I really don't, honestly. I've never, I wouldn't call myself at least a modern day feminist. That's like something I'd definitely stay away from. So no, I don't think, I definitely wouldn't go off of sex being the deciding factor. But like you were saying, there are some really good, even on that longer list of nominees, there's some really good nominees on that list. So, I mean, I think, whichever way they pull it and with them taking gender into consideration, I think that it just shows that there's more, that people can, have more, how do you say it? More respect for women, one. I think it just shows how far women have come for them to be considered and for them to be saying, oh, we're going to choose a woman. I don't think that's necessarily downplaying any of the, good candidates, other good candidates that are on the list of nominees. So I'm not really, I wouldn't choose gender in specific, but looking at records, I definitely think that there are some great women nominees on that list.
Right. I think you're right. He vetted the list initially for merit. He's nominated 2 men to the court. And so for me, it's just natural to look around and say, are there other women on this list that should be viable candidates? They are incredible records, again, for both of them. Also, there are a few of the only names who have currently as many opinions. They were early nominees. And so that's another thing going for them is they've been on the appellate court a little bit longer. David, did you have any thoughts or opinions about these 3 candidates I talked about?
Not too much, other than I do like that the list is a little bit, it comes off as unbiased, having just a good balance, but also just these are some phenomenal candidates, right? These are some phenomenal nominees, right? And so I think it's very important just to understand the context of each of these people. Like you said, one of them were which one was it that was even thought of before Kavanaugh? Which one was it again?
Amy Coney Barrett.
Amy Coney Barrett. And so just saying hey, we are still considering her to be a justice is very important. I think it just speaks a lot to her credibility.
Right. And what about the fact what our Jeannie from Georgia just mentioned, which is, can a woman really withstand the type of scrutiny Kavanaugh went under? And my answer is always going to be yes. We're pretty tough. I mean, we can handle it. I mean, I know I'm a Texan, but we're not flowers. And I also don't think you can attack women publicly the same way that men are going to be attacked. I mean, unfortunately, I think men in our culture, they're like the cultural punching bags right now, and it's awful. But women, the left cannot with any form whatsoever of intellectually honesty attack women in the way that they would have attacked a man. So she actually hopefully would be insulated. No matter what, the nominee is going to have a tough road ahead, unfortunately, because of politicalization of this, which shouldn't even be, right? We know the courts have delved into issues they're not supposed to be in if it's this political about a court nominee. But her family will be under scrutiny, so it's something for us to be mindful of, and we should be humans about. And I'm sure these women are just completely above reproach, but yeah, their families are about to go through it. If liberals come out attacking these women, it's going to say a lot about them. I mean, they're the party of the feminists, right?
Right.
Rachel's over there yes, Rachel, do you want to add to that before our break?
No, not. I think you said it perfectly. No, definitely, they are the women. They are the party of women, and so if they were coming out to attack women, it just kind of shows you the hypocrisy even more so, of what that party's about. So, they're very qualified, and I think that any of them would make a great Supreme Court justice.
Yes, and Senator Cruz, you work for his campaign. I mean, he's on the Judiciary Committee. I'm so grateful for his work on this. He himself is an incredible litigator and attorney, and so I'm grateful that men like him and all the other senators, like Senator Cornyn, are going to be involved. They're going to be doing their job to vet the candidate well,
absolutely,
for their backgrounds, and that's something as we go into Election Day, not just to think of the presidency and the role of the nomination, but the senators that you elect will confirm or deny the nominee. So don't forget about your senators.
Exactly.
Stay with us. We're going to continue talking when we get back after this really short break.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is Chelsey Youman with the Millennial Roundtable, and we've been talking about these judicial nominees and all of just the current events swirling around what's happening in our country right now. We are going to shift a little bit, though. At the end of the last segment, I just briefly mentioned that not only should we be, as voters, looking at our presidential nominee, President Trump on the Republican side, Biden on the other side, which I won't get into, but you also need to be looking at your senators right now, because they're going to be charged with potentially, if they're especially on the Judiciary Committee, confirming and working through the process of vetting the Supreme Court nominee. And so with that said, I'm going to turn a little bit to Texas, because although we are a national show, I think it's a really good example of how much the Democrat Party is pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into swing states to turn them. So outside money, $6.8 million, $6.2 million has been poured into, just in the last month alone, Texas trying to flip our House to be Democrat. And that's really important. And I know, Rachel, you're on the line. You are with the Senator Cruz campaign. Tell us what you're seeing here with these. Texas as a silo, as a potential swing state. Is this consistent with what you're seeing? And maybe what impact do you think that type of money, outside money, is going to have on these states that have traditionally been Republican in this upcoming general election?
So I can't speak to that, like as well as I'd like to, because I'm not a numbers person or anything like that. But there's definitely a ton of money coming in. In 2018, Robert O'Rourke, Beto, raised $80 million in Texas, and against an incumbent senator, and that's there's so much money. There's always so much money being poured into these Democrat races, but there's so much being poured in here to Texas, and it is scary to see that, because you can't win an election without money. That's just, it stinks, but that's how it is. But just because they're raising all this money doesn't mean that they are going to win. I think we saw that definitely in 2018, but it definitely should, scare people and kind of light that fire under their rears, because so many people aren't registered to vote. It's insane how many people aren't registered to vote. I don't have numbers right here in front of me, but definitely if you are of voting age and you see things going on around you that you don't like, well, you have the power to go ahead and vote. And so that's what I would say to do. That's give money if you can, vote, get your friends to vote, bring 10, 20 people to vote at the polls with you, because it really does come down to people, not being complacent and getting out and doing their part to keep, Texas red, and then keep other states red, and keep our nation kind of going on the right track. We have a really big election coming up. Everyone says, it's the biggest election we've ever seen in our lives. Well, every election is the biggest one of your time, but I really do think that this one is something, different that we haven't really seen before, because we're definitely looking at socialists versus, capitalists right now, and it's scary.
Yes, Rachel, I love what you're bringing up, because you alluded to the fact that even in spite of the millions of dollars being poured into these races from outside sources, in spite of Hollywood backing some of these candidates, Beto O'Rourke still lost, and it just goes to show that we can't really be bought, that voters still deeply, passionately care about their issues. They hopefully know why they're voting and what they want to vote for. If you're voting on pro-life issues, if you are in the state of Texas, go to prolife.org and you can see some of the 5 candidates that we're promoting here at the state level. But don't forget to vote down ballot too, because a lot of these issues are decided at your state, local, legislative levels. So do not forget about your state reps, your state senators. They're so important. David, one of the articles we have posted on pointofview.net, you can go there and read it. It is by David French. It's a Time article, and it says, America is being pulled apart. Here's what we can do to heal our nation. And he does go through kind of this conundrum we've discussed, which is really we're divided. And I wanted the show to be really hopeful, because I think that we get it. We get it, everyone. Everybody's angry. Everybody's yelling at each other on Facebook. We can't tell. I'm so nervous for Thanksgiving. No, not really. I have a great family. But, if you got some liberals around the table, how do we, just kidding. Don't call me. But really, we have seen more and more divisions. And so this article really talks about why that is. There's kind of this philosophy that has developed, which is we surround ourselves. It's a law of group polarization, which is people who agree with each other grow more enthusiastic in their beliefs and agreement, which we probably see on this show is a great example of that. Like-minded Second Amendment advocates gather and grow more opposed to gun control. But the same with the environmental activists. And they put in some of the city's voting trends and show that, look, we live in a silo. We surround ourselves with people who believe like we do. 81% of evangelicals voted for President Trump, but in Manhattan, 87% voted for Hillary Clinton. So similar statistics for D.C. and San Francisco. most people, we ultimately will end up under one party, even if you disagree with them. So how do we reconcile come November 4th when all of the dust settles and, some of us are cheering, some of our neighbors are crying? How do we just come together as a country? And David, I wanted to just turn to you because it's something you and I have discussed a lot on this show. Just We have hope outside of politics. Of course, our hope is in Christ and, salvation and forgiveness. And we seek unity as a people.
Right.
And how do we, in a time that feels very contentious, continue to pursue that unity, David?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Don't you have the answer?
I have
okay.
all the answers. No, definitely not. And I can't give you such a simple answer, honestly. I think this is such a healthy opportunity and an invitation to wrestle. I'm all about that because it's really easy to just want to simplify something and just put an instant gratification type of answer because we are such a generation that we love to go down the road that is easy. We love to go through those things. We don't like confrontation. We don't like to face the hard issues. Yet those of us that do, we go through it. And so that's what the Christian life is, honestly. It's persevering, even through times where our expectations aren't met, right? And so I really do think the hope in all of this is to have a heart of grace, to extend love and grace the same way we would want love and grace to be extended to us, which is very, very tough, especially, I think in this article with David French, I was reading through it, and it was this time, this dysfunctional time is what it seems like in politics. It seems like we're going through a cold civil war. We're going through some kind of a civil war internally. And it's just so divisive right now because it's as if people are trying to put out fire after fire. Yet there's more fire being spread, literally physically in California, but also just politically and in so many areas of the church. And so I know that in this season, it's just very tough to just be right here on the table. But yet the table is the most powerful thing, I think, because what it does is it lowers our walls. Meeting someone at a table, breaking bread with them, and having these discussions, the willingness to listen, to learn, and to even not agree on some things, and that's okay. But at any point, if we're trying to impose our beliefs and our things on someone, it doesn't come from a place of love, because love is always an invitation. Love is what? Kind, gentle, et cetera, right?
You're right. And I think, we all mean it in a venerable way. I'm as passionate of an advocate. I'm black and white. I pick a team. There's not a lot of middle ground for me. I just see things this makes so much sense to me. Doesn't it make sense to you? But to be reminded, the way you do that in a winsome way, in a way with a heart towards healing. But those conversations are important to have. So advocate, vote. Don't just show up to a march, go vote. But to do it in a way that's loving and kind. Thank you, David, for just reminding us of that here at the end of our segment. David is involved with Kingdom Initiative, so you can find him there at kingdominitiative.org. Thank you, Rachel Redus, for being with us. She is with Senator Cruz's campaign. And I'm Chelsey Youman, your host with Human Coalition Action, hucoaction.org. Go to our websites, learn more about us, or go to pointofview.net.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.